So in this video, we're going to look at the composition of functions, but we're going to look at addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of these functions. These are just basic function operations. So let's get started with the addition. Now you've seen functions written. We've done the compositions where you have f of g of x, and we're actually using inputs and outputs and using outputs as inputs for other functions. This is just simply functional operations, and we're going to actually be combining these functions in either one of the four basic mathematical operations. So let's look at the first one, f plus g of x. And notice that's a plus, it's not a circle. All you're going to do for f plus g of x is we're going to add the two functions f of x plus g of x. This literally means f of x plus g of x. So f of x is x squared minus 4 plus g of x, which is x plus 2. And then I'm going to combine like terms. So I have x squared plus x, and negative 4 and 2 is minus 2. And that's it. That's simple. That's how you add the functions together. So let's look at the next one here. Here I have f plus g of negative 2. Again, that means basically f of negative 2 plus g of negative 2. So we can do this one of two ways. We can either do each one of these separately and then add them together, or write it all as one big equation. I'm going to write it all as one big equation. So f of negative 2, actually we'll do it separately to make it easy. Let's do f of negative 2 first. F is x squared minus 4. So let's plug in negative 2 for our input, using that word again, input, minus 4. So 2 squared is 4, 4 minus 4 is 0. So f of negative 2 is 0. Let's do g of negative 2. G of negative 2, g is x plus 2, so it's going to be negative 2 plus 2, and that also gives me 0. So now to finalize my operation, I add f of negative 2 plus g of negative 2, so 0 plus 0 is 0. And that is your answer. So let's look at subtraction now. We have f minus g. Well, f minus g of x. Well, f is x squared minus 4. Okay, and that's going to be minus g of x. Now you have to be very careful here when you have subtraction. Remember we talked about with subtracting polynomials, g is x plus 2. That has to be in parentheses because you're subtracting the whole thing. So what that creates now is when you get rid of those parentheses, you end up with a negative positive, which is negative x, and a negative positive, which is a negative 2. So now you just combine your like terms. I have x squared minus x, and then negative 4 and negative 2 is negative 6, and you're done again. These are actually very simple compared to the other compositions that we were doing. Okay? So let's look at this example, f minus g of negative 3. And again, just so you know, this means f of x minus g of x. And this one equals f of negative 3 minus g of negative 3. So let's solve each one of them individually. So let's do f of negative 3 first. So f of x is x squared minus 4. So I'm going to plug in my value, negative 3, x squared, input, 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 minus 4. And negative 3 squared gives me positive 9. 9 minus 4 is 5. So f of negative 3 is 5. Now let's do g of negative 3. G of negative 3, g of x is x plus 2, so I'm going to plug in, oh sorry, not negative 3, my bad, my mistake. You plug in 5, because that was your output, so that's a 5. My bad. So you plug in 5, so that's negative 5 plus 2. Okay? Sorry, just 5, just 5. That's positive. Again, I goofed up because I was writing too fast. But anyway, 5 is our output from and I'm going back into composition of functions again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this because I made a mistake. Ignore this part right here. I don't want to go back and film the whole video again. So it is correct. It was g of -3. So let's plug in g of -3. This is what happens when you film too many videos in one day. G of -3. So I'm going to do g of -3. And so I'm going to plug -3 in for x. So I have -3 plus 2. And that's going to give me -1. So now I have f of -3 and g of -3. And the operation is subtraction. So I've got 5 minus -1, which is 5 plus 1, which is 6. So so I don't slip anymore. Now we're going to do multiplication. And so multiplication, this is f times g. So again, f is x squared minus 4. So this is the same thing as f of x times g of x. Whereas this would also be f of -2 times g of -2. So let's do this one first. F of x is x squared minus 4. So this is going to be x squared minus 4. That's f of x. Times g of x, which is x plus 2. And then I'm going to do a long distribution here. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times 2 is 2x squared. -4 times x is -4x, and -4 times 2 is -8. My last step is just going to be to combine. This isn't anything new, and if you look here, we really don't have anything to combine. So it's already done for you. So let's come over here where we're actually plugging a value in. So let's do f of -2. Again, f of x is x squared minus 4. So I'm going to do -2 squared minus 4. Input. 4 minus 4 is 0. So that's f of -2. Now let's do g of -2. G of -2 also comes out to, you have -2 plus 2, which comes out to 0. And remember, we're looking at multiplication, so we're multiplying f times g. Well, in this case, it's an easy one, 0 times 0. So that is 0. Last one is division, and it's the same thing. This is the same thing as f of x divided by g of x, whereas this one would be f of -1 divided by g of -1. So let's figure this out. F of x. We know what f of x is. F of x is x squared minus 4. So I have x squared minus 4 on the top, since it's division. And g of x is x plus 2. So I've got x plus 2 on the bottom. But I'm not done yet. I can actually factor x squared minus 4. That's a difference of squares. So I'm going to factor that as x plus 2 times x minus 2. The bottom stays the same, x plus 2. I put parentheses around it. You don't have to. So what happens is now these two cross out, and I'm left with x minus 2. And that's what you get for f of x divided by g of x. In our last example, if we do f of -1, let's do f of -1. If I do f of -1, f of x is x squared minus 4. So it's going to be -1 squared minus 4. That'll be 1 minus 4, which is -3. That's f of -1. Let's do g of -1, which is x plus 2. So it'll be -1 plus 2, which is 1. So now let's do f divided by g. And f divided by g would be -3 divided by 1, which is -3. That's a negative. And that is your answer. And that is how we use addition, subtraction, and multiplication and division to compose functions.